The deafening sound of gunfire jolted Zara Donovan from her sleep as the train lurched violently to a halt. It was 1879, and she was just 6 hours away from reaching Promise Creek, Wyoming, her chance at a new beginning far from Boston's suffocating society. Now, as screams echoed through the passenger car and boots thundered across the roof, that dream seemed to be slipping through her fingers like desert sand. "Nobody move. This is a robbery." A masked man burst through the door, his revolver gleaming in the afternoon sunlight that streamed through the windows. Zara's heart hammered against her ribs as she clutched her reticule closer to her chest. Inside was everything she had: $300 and the deed to her late aunt's millinery shop in Promise Creek. Without it, she had nothing. Two more bandits entered the car, their faces obscured by bandanas. Valuables in the bag, now. One of them shouted, tossing a burlap sack to a frightened elderly couple across from Zara. When the sack reached her, Zara hesitated, her knuckles white around her reticule. The nearest robber noticed her reluctance and stepped closer, his eyes cold beneath the shadow of his hat. "Don't be foolish, miss," he warned, the barrel of his gun pointing directly at her. "Whatever you're holding ain't worth dying for, but it was worth everything." In a split-second decision that would alter the course of her life forever, Zara slipped from her seat and darted toward the door at the back of the car. Shouts erupted behind her, followed by the crack of a gunshot that splintered the wooden panel inches from her head. She burst through the door onto the narrow platform between cars, the hot desert wind whipping her chestnut hair free from its pins. Without allowing herself time to reconsider, she jumped. The impact knocked the breath from her lungs as she tumbled down a rocky embankment. Pain shot through her ankle, but adrenaline propelled her forward. Limping through scrubby brush and cacti, her once fine traveling dress catching and tearing on thorns. Behind her, angry voices called out, but Zara didn't look back. She kept moving, each step sending spikes of agony up her leg, until she reached a small ravine where she collapsed, gasping for breath. The sound of horses' hooves thundered in the distance, the bandits, making their escape with their ill-gotten gains. The train whistle blew, long and mournful, and Zara realized with a sinking heart that it was continuing its journey without her. She was stranded in the middle of the Wyoming territory with nothing but the clothes on her back, her precious reticule, and not a soul who knew where she was. As the sun climbed higher in the cloudless sky, Zara's situation grew increasingly dire. Her silk traveling dress, fashionable in Boston, was entirely unsuitable for the harsh landscape. Her ankle throbbed relentlessly, and her throat burned with thirst. Still, she forced herself to keep moving, following the train tracks in what she hoped was the direction of Promise Creek. By midday, the heat had become unbearable. Sweat plastered her hair to her neck, and black spots danced before her eyes. When she stumbled for the third time in as many minutes, Zara knew she couldn't go much further. It was then that she heard the rhythmic beat of hooves against packed earth, growing louder by the second. Fear sent a fresh surge of energy through her veins. Had the bandits returned? She scrambled behind a large boulder, wincing as her injured ankle protested the sudden movement. A lone rider appeared on the horizon, his silhouette shimmering in the heat waves rising from the ground. As he drew closer, Zara could make out a tall figure atop a chestnut stallion, his broad shoulders squared beneath a worn leather vest, a cowboy hat pulled low over his eyes. He rode with the easy confidence of a man who knew this land intimately, and something about his purposeful approach made Zara's breath catch in her throat. He wasn't riding aimlessly, he was tracking something, or someone. The rider slowed his horse as he neared her hiding place, scanning the terrain with a deliberate gaze. Then, to Zara's astonishment, he called out, "You can come out now, miss. Train robbers are long gone." Zara remained frozen, unsure whether to trust this stranger. "I know you're there," he continued, his voice deep and steady. "Behind that boulder, you've left a trail a blind man could follow." Realizing concealment was futile, Zara slowly emerged from her hiding place, wincing as she put weight on her injured ankle. She raised her chin defiantly, clutching her reticule with white-knuckled determination. The cowboy dismounted in one fluid motion, and Zara got her first clear look at him. Tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of a summer storm, he was perhaps 30 years old. His face bore the weathered lines of a man who spent his life outdoors, but there was a gentleness in his expression that somewhat eased her fear. He approached slowly, as one might a spooked horse. "Name's Trace Irwin," he said, removing his hat in a gesture of respect. "Most folks call me Trace." "How did you know I was here?" Zara demanded, keeping her distance. A smile played at the corners of his mouth. "I've been waiting." Zara blinked in confusion. "Waiting for me? That's impossible. You couldn't have known the train would be robbed." "Didn't say I was waiting for a robbery," Trace replied, his eyes crinkling slightly at the corners. "Been expecting someone on that train, though. When I heard shots and saw it pull away from this spot, well," he shrugged, "figured someone might need help." "You were expecting someone from the train?" Zara asked, her suspicion growing. "Who?" "Martha Donovan's niece." He watched her reaction closely. "You'd be Zara, I reckon." Hearing her name from this stranger's lips was like a bucket of cold water. "How do you know who I am?" "Your aunt was my neighbor. Good woman. When she passed, she asked me to keep an eye out for you, make sure you got settled all right." His expression softened. "She spoke highly of you." Zara's legs nearly gave out beneath her, a combination of relief, exhaustion, and grief. Her Aunt Martha, a woman she'd met only once as a child, had thought to arrange for someone to look after her arrival. Trace noticed her unsteadiness and stepped forward. "You're hurt." "It's nothing." "Just a twisted ankle," Zara insisted, though the pain had grown nearly unbearable. He frowned, clearly unconvinced. "Promise Creek's still a good 15 miles from here. You planning to crawl the rest of the way?" Despite everything, Zara felt a smile tug at her lips. "If necessary," Trace chuckled, a warm sound that seemed to dispel some of the tension between them. "Stubborn." "Your aunt mentioned that too," he gestured to his horse. "Samson here can carry us both to town. Get that ankle looked at properly." Zara hesitated, years of proper Boston upbringing warring with her desperate situation. Accepting help from a strange man riding with him, no less, would have been unthinkable back east. But this wasn't Boston, and she was beginning to understand that the rules of survival were different here. "I have no way to repay you," she said finally. Trace shook his head. "Not looking for payment, just keeping a promise to a good neighbor." With that, he offered his hand. After a moment's hesitation, Zara took it, feeling the strength and calluses of a man who worked with his hands. In one smooth motion, he lifted her onto his horse, then mounted behind her. "Hold tight," he instructed, reaching around her to take the reins. As they set off toward Promise Creek, Zara found herself enclosed in the solid warmth of the cowboy's presence, his arms a protective barrier on either side of her. The steady rhythm of the horse's gait and the exhaustion of her ordeal soon lulled her into a state between wakefulness and sleep. "Thank you," she murmured, not entirely sure if she'd spoken aloud. "Just doing what needed doing," came the quiet reply, his breath warm against her ear. "Rest now." "You're safe." For the first time since the train robbery, Zara believed it might be true. Promise Creek appeared on the horizon as the sun began its descent, painting the western sky in brilliant hues of orange and gold. What Zara had imagined as a quaint, picturesque town from her aunt's letters revealed itself as a dusty collection of wooden buildings strung along a wide main street, with scattered homesteads visible in the surrounding landscape. "It's not much to look at," Trace admitted, seeming to sense her disappointment. "But the people are good and the land is better." As they rode down the main street, curious glances turned their way. Zara became acutely aware of her disheveled appearance, torn dress, hair in wild disarray, and the impropriety of riding so intimately with a man she'd just met. "Everyone's staring," she whispered. "News travels fast here," Trace replied. "Word of the train robbery probably reached town before we did, and newcomers are rare enough to warrant a look." They stopped outside a whitewashed building with a hand-painted sign that read, "Dr. Michael Jenkins, physician and surgeon." "Doc Jenkins will see to that ankle," Trace said, dismounting before carefully helping Zara down. Her legs buckled immediately, and he caught her with strong hands around her waist. "I can manage," she insisted, though they both knew it wasn't true. With a sigh that suggested he was already becoming accustomed to her stubbornness, Trace swept her into his arms as if she weighed nothing at all. "Sometimes accepting help isn't a weakness, Miss Donovan." Before she could formulate a retort, the door opened to reveal a middle-aged man with kind eyes and salt and pepper hair. "Heard you were coming," he said, stepping aside to let them enter. "Put her on the examination table, Trace." Zara found herself deposited gently onto a clean white surface in a surprisingly well-appointed room. As the doctor examined her ankle, Trace explained the circumstances of finding her. "You're lucky," Dr. Jenkins said, both to Zara and Trace. "Sprained, not broken. A week of rest and you'll be back on your feet." "A week," Zara protested. "But the shop's been closed for 2 months since your aunt passed," Trace interrupted gently. "Another week won't matter, but where will I stay?" "I had arranged to live in the rooms above the millinery, but if it's been closed." Dr. Jenkins and Trace exchanged a look that Zara couldn't quite interpret. "Mrs. Sullivan at the boarding house has a room," the doctor suggested. "Though her rates, I have money," Zara assured him, patting her reticule. "The bandits didn't get everything." Another glance passed between the men, this one clearly concerned. "What?" Zara demanded. "Mrs. Sullivan's a fine woman," Trace said carefully, "but her establishment caters mostly to single men passing through, not the place for a lady on her own." "Then where do you suggest I go?" Zara's voice rose with frustration and the beginnings of panic. "I don't know anyone here except," she stopped, suddenly realizing the implication of what Trace was suggesting. "Your aunt's house is still standing," he said, confirming her suspicion. "It's right next to mine, like I mentioned. Been keeping an eye on it for you." "You want me to stay in a dead woman's house, alone, next to a man I just met?" Zara couldn't keep the incredulity from her voice. Dr. Jenkins cleared his throat. "I could send my wife, Clara, to stay with you for a few days, if that would make you more comfortable." Zara closed her eyes, feeling overwhelmed. Everything was happening too fast. This morning she had been on a train, excited about her new beginning. Now she was injured, nearly penniless and dependent on the kindness of strangers. "I think," she said finally, opening her eyes to meet Trace's steady gaze, "that I would like to see my aunt's house before making any decisions." The relief on his face was palpable. "Fair enough, after Dr. Jenkins had wrapped her ankle and provided a set of crutches. Trace helped Zara outside where a small crowd had gathered, curious about the newcomer. "Miss Donovan needs rest," he announced firmly, dispersing the onlookers with a stern look. He assisted her into a waiting wagon that had appeared during her examination. "Borrowed it from the livery," he explained, settling beside her on the wooden seat. "Easier than riding double with your injury." The journey to the outskirts of town took less than 15 minutes. As they traveled, Trace pointed out landmarks: the general store, the schoolhouse, the church where services were held every Sunday. "And there," he said finally, gesturing ahead, "is home." 2 cabins stood about 50 yards apart on a gentle rise overlooking a creek. The one on the left was clearly inhabited, with smoke rising from the chimney and a well-tended vegetable garden to the side. The right one looked sound but dormant, waiting for life to return to it. "Your place and my aunt's," Zara murmured. "Martha built hers first," Trace explained as he brought the wagon to a halt. "I came along 5 years ago looking for land to ranch. She sold me this parcel, helped me build my cabin. Said she liked having a neighbor close enough to see the smoke from their chimney, but not so close she had to hear them snoring." The memory brought a smile to his face, and Zara found herself smiling too, though her heart ached for the aunt she'd never really known. "She left you everything," Trace continued, helping her down from the wagon. "The house, the shop in town, and about 20 acres stretching from here to the creek." Zara looked at him in surprise. 20 acres. The lawyer only mentioned the millinery. Trace's expression darkened momentarily. "Eastman's not the most thorough lawyer. I made sure all the paperwork was filed proper, though. It's yours, free and clear. He supported her as they approached the cabin, producing a key from his pocket to unlock the door. Inside, the single room was neat and simply furnished a bed against one wall, a table with 2 chairs, a small stove, and a rocking chair near the stone fireplace. "It's not what you're used to, I expect," Trace said, watching her reaction closely. Zara hobbled forward on her crutches, taking in the hand-sewn quilt on the bed, the curtains framing the window, the row of books on a shelf above the fireplace. She could feel her aunt's presence here in the careful arrangement of humble possessions, in the dried flowers hanging from the rafters. "It's perfect," she whispered, meaning it despite the stark difference from her family's townhouse in Boston. Relief softened Trace's features. "I'll fetch your trunk from the station tomorrow once it arrives with the evening train for tonight." He hesitated. "Would you be comfortable if I brought Clara Jenkins to stay with you? Or I could ride for Mrs. Peterson. She's the widow who helps with birthing and laying out the dead. Respectable woman." Zara considered her options. The proper thing would be to insist on a chaperone. But she was exhausted, in pain, and the thought of making polite conversation with a stranger was almost unbearable. "I'll be fine alone," she decided. "You said yourself you're just next door if I need anything." Trace looked uncertain. "People will talk." "Let them," Zara replied with sudden fierceness. "I've left one life of caring what people think behind me. I won't start another here." A slow smile spread across Trace's face, genuine admiration in his eyes. "Your aunt said you had spirit." He built a fire in the hearth and showed her where Martha had kept her provisions: flour, coffee, dried beans, and jerky in a small pantry built into one wall. There was a well just outside the back door and an outhouse discreetly positioned behind a stand of juniper trees. "I'll bring you some supper in a bit," he promised as he prepared to leave. "And fresh water for washing up." Left alone, Zara sank onto the edge of the bed, finally allowing the emotions of the day to wash over her. She wept for the terror of the robbery, for the aunt she'd never know, for the strange twist of fate that had brought her here. When her tears were spent, she opened her reticule and counted what remained of her money. $173, enough to survive on while she reopened the millinery, but not nearly the cushion she'd hoped for. True to his word, Trace returned an hour later with a covered pot of stew, a loaf of fresh bread, and a bucket of water. He'd also brought a clean nightgown and a calico dress. "They belonged to Martha," he explained, setting everything on the table. "Clara Jenkins altered them for you. She guessed at your size." The thoughtfulness of the gesture brought fresh tears to Zara's eyes. "Thank you." Trace looked uncomfortable with her gratitude. "Just being neighborly." He moved toward the door. "I'll come check on you in the morning. If you need anything before then, just ring that bell by the door. I'll hear it." After he left, Zara ate the hearty stew venison with potatoes and carrots and used the water to wash away the dust of her journey. The nightgown was soft with age and a bit short, but blessedly clean. As she lay in her aunt's bed, listening to the unfamiliar night sounds of the Wyoming wilderness, Zara found herself thinking of Thomas Irwin's storm-gray eyes and the way he'd said, "I've been waiting," as if her arrival was something he'd been counting on. It was a dangerous thought for a woman alone in a strange place. But as sleep claimed her, Zara couldn't help but wonder if perhaps her aunt had arranged more than just a neighbor's watchful eye. The next week passed in a blur of adjustment and revelation for Zara. True to Dr. Jenkins' prediction, her ankle improved steadily, though the forced rest chafed at her independent nature. Trace proved to be a constant presence, bringing meals, firewood, and news from town, yet he maintained a respectful distance that both reassured and, oddly, disappointed her. On her third day in Promise Creek, Clara Jenkins arrived with Zara's trunk, rescued from the train station. The doctor's wife was a plump, cheerful woman with bright blue eyes and a talent for friendly gossip that provided Zara with a crash course in local dynamics. "Everyone's talking about how Trace found you after the robbery," Clara confided as she helped Zara unpack her Boston clothes, most of which were hopelessly impractical for Wyoming life. "Some are saying it was Providence. Others," She hesitated, folding a silk shirtwaist with careful hands. Others? Zara prompted. Clara's cheeks reddened slightly. Well, it's just that Trace has been alone a long time. Some folks wonder if Martha might have had matchmaking on her mind when she asked him to look out for you. Zara nearly dropped the hairbrush she was holding. That's absurd. My aunt wouldn't. We never even discussed. Of course not, Clara soothed, though her eyes twinkled with amusement. Still, Martha was a practical woman. She valued good land and good character above all. Trace has both. Before Zara could formulate a response, the subject of their conversation knocked on the door, bringing a basket of fresh eggs and milk from his own small farm. Ladies, he greeted them, his hat in his hands. If he noticed Zara's flushed cheeks, he gave no indication. I'm headed into town. Anything you need, Miss Donovan? Zara cleared her throat, attempting to regain her composure. Actually, yes, I'd like to see the millinery if you wouldn't mind taking me. Concern creased his brow. Your ankle is much improved, she insisted. And I can't stay cooped up in this cabin forever. I need to assess the shop, see what supplies I have to work with. Clara intervened before Trace could object further. I think fresh air would do her good, Trace, and I'll come along to help. Thus outnumbered, Trace relented, and an hour later, Zara found herself seated beside him in the wagon once more, Clara perched on her other side as they made their way into town. The Promise Creek Millinery Shop sat on a corner of Main Street, its large front window dusty but intact. As Trace helped Zara down from the wagon, she couldn't help but notice how the townspeople watched them, curiosity and speculation plain on their faces. Ignore them, Trace murmured, his hand steady at her elbow. Small towns run on gossip. They'll find something new to talk about soon enough. The shop's interior was dim when they entered, sunlight filtering through the grime-covered windows to illuminate a space that was smaller than Zara had imagined but well organized. Glass cases displayed ribbons, feathers, and other trimmings. Shelves held bolts of fabric and rows of hat forms. A workbench at the back held the tools of the milliner's trade. It's perfect, Zara breathed, already envisioning how she would arrange her own creations, the Boston styles she could introduce to the women of Promise Creek. It needs a good cleaning, Clara observed practically, running a finger through the dust on a counter. I'll help with that, Trace offered, surprising both women. When they looked at him, he shrugged. What? I know how to use a broom. The back room contained a small but serviceable living space, a bed, a washstand, a tiny kitchen area, and a desk where Martha had apparently kept her accounts. Zara sat at the desk, opening drawers to find neat ledgers documenting every transaction. She was very organized, Zara noted with growing respect for the aunt she'd never known. Martha believed proper bookkeeping was as important as proper breathing, Trace said with a fond smile. She used to lecture me about it whenever I'd come in to buy a gift for. He stopped abruptly. For whom? Zara couldn't help asking. A shadow passed over his face. No one important. It was a long time ago. Clara exchanged a meaningful look with Zara before discreetly excusing herself to examine the shop's inventory, leaving them alone. I appreciate all you've done for me, Zara said into the sudden silence. But I don't want to keep imposing on your kindness. Once I've cleaned this place up, I'll move in here as I originally planned. Trace's expression was unreadable. It's not an imposition. Still, it's not proper for me to stay in a cabin next to a bachelor's home, Zara pointed out. As you said, people talk. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. And as you said, you left caring about such things behind in Boston. That doesn't mean I should be reckless with my reputation in a new town, she countered. I intend to build a business here. I need the community's respect. Trace studied her for a long moment, then nodded once. You're right, of course. When do you want to move? As soon as my ankle is fully healed. Another few days, perhaps. I'll help you get settled, he promised, though something in his tone had changed, become more formal. Now, let's see about getting this place habitable again. Over the next several hours, the three of them transformed the dusty shop into a clean, welcoming space. Trace replaced a loose floorboard, fixed a leaky pipe under the sink, and carried buckets of water from the town pump. Clara swept and dusted, while Zara organized inventory and studied her aunt's ledgers. By late afternoon, exhaustion had set in, and Zara's ankle throbbed painfully. Trace noticed her wince as she stood from the desk. "Time to head back," he declared, brooking no argument. "You've pushed yourself enough for one day." Too tired to protest, Zara allowed him to help her into the wagon. Clara declined a ride, saying she needed to stop at the general store for supplies. As they rode back to the cabins in the golden light of approaching sunset, Zara found herself stealing glances at Trace's profile. There was something about him that intrigued her, a depth beneath his quiet strength, hints of a story he kept carefully guarded. "You mentioned buying gifts before," she ventured. "Were you married once?" The question hung in the air between them for so long that Zara thought he might not answer. "Engaged," he finally said, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. 6 years ago, her name was Rebecca. She was the school teacher here. "What happened?" Zara asked softly. Scarlet fever took her, along with 12 others, mostly children. His hands tightened on the reins. "I was away delivering cattle to the railroad. By the time I got back, she was already gone." "I'm so sorry," Zara whispered, understanding now the shadows that sometimes darkened his eyes. "Your aunt helped me through it," Trace continued after a moment. "She'd lost her husband years before. Said grief was like a river, you couldn't fight the current, just had to learn to swim in it until you reached calmer waters." "Wise words," Zara murmured, thinking of her own losses, her parents to a carriage accident when she was 19, leaving her in the care of distant relatives who viewed her as little more than an unpaid companion and potential marriage pawn. "Martha was the wisest person I knew," Trace agreed. Then, with a sideways glance at Zara, he added, "She'd be proud of how you're handling all this. Not many women would jump from a moving train, outrun bandits, and still have the spirit to open a business a week later." Warmth bloomed in Zara's chest at his words. "Thank you. That means a great deal." They rode the rest of the way in comfortable silence, the connection between them somehow deeper for the truths they'd shared. That night, as Zara prepared for bed in the cabin that felt increasingly like home, she found herself thinking about Trace's lost love and the pain he still carried. She wondered if his heart had healed enough to love again, and why that question suddenly seemed so important to her. The next day brought an unexpected visitor to Martha's cabin. Zara was sitting on the small porch, her ankle propped on a stool as she sorted through ribbons salvaged from the shop, when a cloud of dust on the horizon announced an approaching rider. Trace emerged from his own cabin, hand resting casually on the revolver at his hip. He relaxed when the rider came close enough to recognize. "Sheriff," he called in greeting. The man who dismounted was tall and lean, with a weathered face and shrewd eyes beneath a badge that proclaimed his office. "Trace," he acknowledged before turning his attention to Zara. "Miss Donovan, I presume?" Zara set aside her work. "Yes, and you are Sheriff Daniel Cooper, madam. I've been tracking the gang that robbed your train." He removed his hat, revealing graying hair. "Thought you might be able to help identify them." "I didn't see their faces," Zara admitted. "They wore bandanas. Any distinguishing features, voices, something unusual about their clothes?" The sheriff pressed. Zara closed her eyes, trying to recall details from the terrifying moments on the train. One of them had a scar on his hand, his right hand. It looked like a burn, maybe, and another spoke with a slight accent. "Southern, I think." Sheriff Cooper nodded, making notes in a small book. "That matches descriptions from other witnesses. We believe it's the Rollins gang. They've hit 3 trains in the last month. Have you caught any of them?" Trace asked, coming to stand beside Zara's chair. "Not yet, but we're closing in." The sheriff's expression was grim. "They shot a conductor on the last job, man still fighting for his life in Cheyenne." Zara felt a chill despite the warm sunshine. "Will they come back? To Promise Creek, I mean?" "Not likely," Cooper assured her. "They don't usually hit the same area twice." "Still, I'd advise caution until we bring them in." He replaced his hat. "If you remember anything else, Miss Donovan, you let me know." After the sheriff departed, Zara found her hands trembling slightly. The robbery had seemed like a nightmare already fading in the light of her new life. The reminder that the bandits were still at large disturbed her more than she wanted to admit. Trace noticed her disquiet. "Don't worry," he said quietly. "You're safe here." "You can't know that," Zara replied, suddenly aware of how vulnerable she was, a woman alone in an isolated cabin. "I can," Trace insisted, "because I won't let anything happen to you." The fierce certainty in his voice made her look up, startled by the intensity of his gaze. In that moment, Zara believed him completely, and something shifted between them, a recognition of feelings that transcended mere neighborly concern. The air seemed to crackle with unspoken emotions until Trace cleared his throat and stepped back. "I should get back to mending that fence. Holler if you need anything." As he walked away, Zara found herself wondering what it would be like to be protected, cherished even, by a man like Thomas Irwin, and why the thought made her heart race in a way that had nothing to do with fear. 3 days later, Dr. Jenkins pronounced Zara's ankle fully healed, though he cautioned her to avoid long walks for another week. With Trace's help, she moved her belongings to the rooms above the millinery shop, determined to establish herself as a proper businesswoman. The shop's grand reopening was scheduled for Saturday, giving Zara time to create several new hat designs to supplement her aunt's existing inventory. Word spread quickly through town, and by mid-morning on opening day, a steady stream of curious women filled the small shop, eager to meet the newcomer and inspect her wares. "These are exquisite," Mrs. Peterson, the midwife, exclaimed over a pale blue bonnet trimmed with forget-me-nots. "Much finer than anything we've seen before, even from dear Martha." "I trained with Madame Rousseau in Boston," Zara explained, pleased by the older woman's appreciation. "She taught me that a hat should complement both the wearer's features and her essence." "Her essence?" Another woman asked skeptically. "Her true nature," Zara clarified. "A shy woman might wear something understated but with unexpected details that reward a closer look. A bold woman might choose dramatic lines that announce her confidence." The ladies exchanged impressed glances, and several made purchases on the spot. By closing time, Zara had sold 6 hats and taken orders for 8 more, a success beyond her expectations. As she counted the day's earnings at her aunt's old desk, a knock at the shop door startled her. Through the glass, she could see Trace standing on the boardwalk, hat in hand. "We're closed," she called teasingly as she unlocked the door. "Heard you had quite a day," he replied, stepping inside. In his arms was a small wooden crate. "Thought you might be too tired to cook, so I brought supper." The gesture touched Zara deeply. "That's very kind. I am famished." They sat at the small table in her living quarters, sharing a meal of cold chicken, cornbread, and apple pie that Trace admitted he'd purchased from the hotel restaurant. "I can shoot, rope, and brand with the best of them," he said with a self-deprecating smile, "but my cooking would probably kill you." Zara laughed, relaxed in his company in a way she'd never been with any man in Boston. "Then I'm grateful for your self-awareness." As they ate, Trace told her about his small ranch, 30 head of cattle, a few horses, and ambitions to expand if the next few seasons were good. Zara shared stories of her apprenticeship with Madame Rousseau and her dreams for the millinery. "I want to create more than just hats," she confessed. "I want to give women here a taste of beauty and possibility, a reminder that practicality doesn't preclude elegance." "Martha would have liked that," Trace said softly. "She always said civilization came to the frontier one teacup and curtain at a time." The mention of her aunt brought a question to Zara's mind. Why did she never tell me about you in her letters? She wrote about the shop, the town, her garden, but never mentioned her nearest neighbor. Something flickered in Trace's eyes, uncertainty, perhaps. "I can't say for sure." Maybe she thought some things were better discovered in person. The ambiguity of his answer intrigued Zara, but before she could press further, Trace rose to leave. "It's getting late. Wouldn't want to give the gossips more fuel." At the door, he hesitated. "There's a social at the church tomorrow after services. Whole town will be there, would you? That is, might you consider attending with me?" The invitation hung between them, weighted with implications that both recognized but neither was quite ready to name. As neighbors. Zara asked, her heart beating a little faster. Trace met her gaze steadily. As whatever you're comfortable with, then yes, she decided, surprising herself with how easily the acceptance came. I'd be delighted. His smile, rare and transformative, stayed with her long after he'd gone, warming her like an ember on a cold night. Sunday dawned clear and bright. Zara dressed carefully in her best dress, a deep green silk that brought out the amber flecks in her hazel eyes and pinned her chestnut hair into a simple but elegant knot. She topped the ensemble with a hat of her own design, modest enough for church, but with artful details that showcased her skill. Trace arrived promptly at 10, wearing a clean shirt and string tie beneath his usual vest, his dark hair slicked back with water. He stared at her for a long moment before finding his voice. "You look extraordinary," he said finally. "Thank you," Zara replied, a blush warming her cheeks. "You clean up rather well yourself." They walked to church side by side, aware of the eyes that followed their progress down Main Street. The small, whitewashed building was already filling with families when they arrived, and a hush fell momentarily as they entered. Clara Jenkins waved them over to a pew near the front, her welcoming smile a balm against the curious stares. Throughout the service, Zara was conscious of Trace beside her, the hymnal they shared, the brush of his sleeve against hers, the deep resonance of his voice joining the congregation in song. The social afterward was held on the church grounds, with tables laden with food prepared by the women of Promise Creek. Zara found herself introduced to what seemed like the entire town, names and faces blurring together, until she felt almost dizzy with the effort to remember them all. Through it all, Trace remained at her side, a steady presence that anchored her in the swirl of new acquaintances. She noticed how people respected him, the way men nodded in deference and women smiled warmly but kept a proper distance. "You're quite the pillar of this community," she observed during a rare moment alone, as they sat at a table sharing slices of 3 different pies thrust upon them by competing bakers. Trace looked uncomfortable with the observation. "I just try to be fair in my dealings and lend a hand when needed." "It's more than that," Zara insisted. "They trust you, value your opinion." Before he could respond, they were interrupted by a striking young woman with golden hair and a dress that, while not precisely fashionable, was clearly chosen to display her considerable charms to advantage. "Trace Irwin, you've been avoiding me," she declared, placing a proprietary hand on his arm. "Aren't you going to introduce me to your friend?" Something like resignation crossed Trace's face. "Zara Donovan, this is Vivian Reed. Her father owns the general store." "Charmed," Vivian said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You're Martha's niece, of course. Everyone's talking about how fortunate you were that Trace found you after that dreadful robbery." "Very fortunate," Zara agreed, immediately sensing the territorial nature of the other woman's interest. "Vivian was just named chairwoman of the Harvest Festival Committee," Trace said, gently extracting his arm from her grip. "It's quite an honor," Vivian preened. "And a tremendous amount of work. I'll need help from all the leading citizens." Her gaze lingered meaningfully on Trace. "Perhaps you could assist with the construction of the dancing platform. You're so good with your hands." The suggestive undertone was unmistakable, and Zara felt an unexpected flare of jealousy. "Ridiculous," she chided herself. "I have no claim on him." "I'm sure Zara would be a valuable addition to your committee as well," Trace suggested, surprising both women. "Her artistic talents could be put to good use with decorations." Vivian's smile tightened. "How thoughtful, but as a newcomer, Miss Donovan might find the commitment overwhelming. Besides, the committee is already quite full." "Actually," Zara said sweetly, "I'd be delighted to help." A town celebration seems the perfect way to become part of the community. The challenge was clear, and for a moment, tension crackled between the two women. Then Vivian laughed, the sound like glass breaking. "Well, how can I refuse such enthusiasm? Our next meeting is Tuesday at the schoolhouse." 4 o'clock sharp. As she sashayed away, Zara turned to Trace with raised eyebrows. "I take it Miss Reed has designs on more than just the Harvest Festival?" Trace sighed, running a hand through his hair in a gesture Zara had come to recognize as discomfort. Vivian's been persistent since she returned from finishing school in Denver last year. And you're not interested? Zara pressed, telling herself the question was merely curiosity. She's not. He searched for the right words. She doesn't want the life I lead. She sees me as a project, a rough cowboy she could polish into the husband she thinks she deserves. And what kind of husband do you think you'd be? The question slipped out before Zara could reconsider its boldness. Trace looked at her then, really looked at her, with an intensity that made her breath catch. The kind who knows the value of a woman who jumps from trains rather than surrender what's rightfully hers, who rebuilds her life with courage and determination, who sees beauty in practical things. The words hung between them, laden with meaning that transcended the immediate context. Zara felt something shift and settle in her chest, like a key turning in a lock she hadn't known existed. Trace Irwin, she said softly, I do believe that was a declaration of sorts. A flush crept up his neck, but he didn't look away. Maybe it was. The moment stretched, taut with possibility, until a crash from the children's game nearby startled them both back to awareness of their public surroundings. Perhaps, Zara suggested, her voice slightly unsteady, we should continue this conversation somewhere more private. Trace nodded, rising to offer her his arm. I'd like that very much. They made their goodbyes, ignoring the knowing looks that followed their departure. By unspoken agreement, they walked not toward town, but in the direction of the creek that gave Promise Creek its name. The afternoon sun dappled the path through cottonwood trees, and the burble of water over stones provided a soothing counterpoint to the tumult of Zara's thoughts. When they reached a small clearing by the water's edge, Trace spread his jacket on a fallen log for her to sit. You were saying something about declarations, he prompted, settling beside her. Zara smiled, finding courage in his directness. I was suggesting that you might have feelings for me that exceed neighborly concern. That's a fair assessment, he agreed, the corner of his mouth lifting. And if I do, then I would tell you that such feelings might not be entirely unrequited. Zara's heart pounded as she admitted what she'd been reluctant to acknowledge even to herself. Trace's eyes darkened. Might not be, aren't be, she amended, her voice barely above a whisper. He took her hand then, his calloused palm warm against her skin. Zara, I know it's fast. We've known each other barely 2 weeks, but I think, he paused, gathering his thoughts. I think sometimes life gives you a second chance when you least expect it. Like being thrown from a train into the path of a man who says he's been waiting for you. Zara suggested, her voice trembling slightly, exactly like that. His thumb traced circles on the back of her hand, sending shivers up her arm. I don't want to rush you if you need time. Time for what? She interrupted. To learn that you're honorable and kind. That you respect my independence while offering support when I need it. I already know these things, Trace. Hope blazed in his eyes. What are you saying? I'm saying, Zara replied, gathering her courage, that I'd like to court properly, of course, but I don't need time to know that what I feel for you is real and growing stronger each day. The smile that transformed his face was worth every moment of uncertainty she'd experienced since arriving in Promise Creek. Slowly, giving her time to withdraw if she wished, Trace raised his free hand to cup her cheek. May I? He asked, his gaze dropping to her lips. In answer, Zara leaned forward, closing the distance between them. Their first kiss was gentle, tentative, a question and an answer both. When they parted, she saw in his eyes the same wonder she felt. I've been waiting for you, Trace murmured, echoing his words from their first meeting, but with a depth of meaning that resonated through Zara's very soul. I'm here now, she whispered back, and I'm not going anywhere. The weeks that followed were the happiest of Zara's life. Her millinery business flourished as word spread beyond Promise Creek to neighboring settlements. Women would travel for hours by wagon to commission one of her creations, often staying overnight at the town's small hotel. Trace courted her with a combination of old-fashioned gallantry and practical partnership that suited them both perfectly. He escorted her to church socials and town meetings, but also taught her to ride and shoot skills he insisted were necessary for frontier life. In turn, Zara brought refinement to his bachelor existence, inviting him for home-cooked meals and insisting he accompany her to the occasional musical evening at the schoolhouse. They balanced each other, her Eastern polish complementing his Western forthrightness. Their courtship was not without challenges. Vivian Reed made her displeasure known through pointed remarks and occasional social snubs. Some townspeople questioned the propriety of their rapid attachment, though Clara Jenkins became their staunch defender, reminding critics that Martha Donovan herself had clearly approved of the match. Besides, Clara told Zara during one of their regular tea visits, anyone with eyes can see you two were made for each other. The way he looks at you like you hung the moon and stars. Is it that obvious? Zara asked, blushing. Only to everyone in 3 counties, Clara teased. When do you think he'll propose? The question caught Zara by surprise. They had spoken of a future together, but in generalities rather than specific plans. I'm not sure, we haven't discussed marriage directly. Clara's expression turned thoughtful. Could be he's concerned about rushing you. Or perhaps, she hesitated. Perhaps what? Zara prompted. Well, Trace carries old wounds, not just Rebecca's death. His father abandoned the family when he was young and his mother struggled to keep them fed. He once told Michael that he'd never marry until he was certain he could provide properly. This insight into Trace's hesitation made sense to Zara. Though they'd shared much of their pasts, he rarely spoke of his childhood, focusing instead on his time in Wyoming. That evening, as they sat on the porch of what was now unquestionably her cabin she had moved back from town, after acknowledging the impracticality of living above the shop, Zara broached the subject carefully. Trace, are you happy with how things are between us? He looked up from the leather bridle he was repairing, surprise evident in his expression. Of course, aren't you? Very, she assured him, but I wonder sometimes where we're heading. Understanding dawned in his eyes. Setting aside his work, he took her hands in his. Zara, I want nothing more than to make you my wife, but my ranch is still small, the cattle business uncertain. I want to offer you security, not struggle. Did it ever occur to you, she asked gently, that I might prefer struggle with you to security without you? Trace's brow furrowed. It's not just about preference, it's about responsibility. A man should be able to provide for his family. And a woman, Zara challenged. What about what I provide? My business is thriving. Together, we'd be more secure than either of us alone. He looked startled, as if the concept of a marriage of equals financially as well as emotionally had never occurred to him. I'm not saying we should marry tomorrow, Zara continued, only that when we consider our future, we should think of it as a partnership in all things. Trace was quiet for a long moment, his thumbs tracing absent patterns on her palms. Finally, he nodded. You're right. I've been thinking like my father, not like myself. Your father? Zara questioned, seizing the rare opportunity to learn more about his past. Trace sighed. He left when the farm failed, said he couldn't face his family when he couldn't feed them. But the truth is, my mother would have weathered any hardship with him if he'd stayed. His leaving broke something in her that never healed. You're not him, Zara said firmly. You would never abandon those who depend on you. No, he agreed, meeting her gaze with renewed certainty. I wouldn't. The tension in his shoulders eased as if a burden had been lifted. He brought her hands to his lips, pressing a kiss to each palm. I love you, Zara Donovan. Will you marry me, not tomorrow, but soon when we've made proper plans for our future together? Joy bloomed in Zara's chest, expanding until she felt it might burst forth like spring flowers after winter's retreat. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I will marry you, Thomas Irwin. Their engagement was announced the following Sunday at church, to general approval and only a few disappointed sighs from the unmarried women of Promise Creek. Clara Jenkins immediately began planning a wedding celebration, while Zara designed her own bridal ensemble, a cream-colored dress with subtle embroidery and a hat adorned with silk roses and pearls from her mother's necklace. As the autumn days shortened and the harvest festival approached, Zara and Trace spent every spare moment preparing for their shared future. They decided she would maintain the millinery in town while he expanded the ranch, combining their talents and resources just as they'd discussed. One evening in late October, as they sat before the fire in Martha's, now Zara's, cabin, discussing plans to enlarge it for their married life, a pounding at the door startled them both. Trace was on his feet instantly, hand moving to the revolver he still wore out of habit. "Who's there?" he called. "Sheriff Cooper, open up, Trace." They exchanged alarmed glances before Trace unbolted the door. The sheriff stood on the porch, his expression grim. "We've got trouble. The Rollins gang was spotted heading this way, 6 riders, heavily armed." Zara felt the blood drain from her face. "They're coming here, to Promise Creek." "Can't say for certain," Cooper replied. "But after hitting the bank in Laramie yesterday, they were seen taking the North Trail. That leads here or to Blackwater, nowhere else." "When?" Trace demanded, already reaching for his coat. "Could be as soon as tomorrow. I'm gathering men to defend the town." The sheriff's gaze shifted to Zara. "Miss Donovan, you might want to stay out here until this blows over. If they're looking for easy targets, the bank and businesses in town will be their focus." After Cooper left to continue recruiting defenders, Zara turned to Trace, fear and determination warring within her. "I should go with you. The shop—" "No," Trace cut her off, his tone brooking no argument. "Your safety matters more than any building or merchandise. Promise me you'll stay here, doors locked, until I return." "And if you don't return—" The possibility tore at her heart even as she voiced it. Trace crossed to her in 2 strides, gathering her into his arms. "I will come back to you. That's a promise I intend to keep." Their kiss was fierce and desperate, laden with all the words they couldn't speak, fears they wouldn't voice, hopes they clung to despite the danger looming on the horizon. When Trace finally pulled away, his expression had hardened into resolved determination. "There's a shotgun in the corner cabinet. Do you remember how to use it?" Zara nodded, remembering their lessons by the creek. "Yes, good. If anyone but me approaches, fire a warning shot if they keep coming." He didn't finish the sentence, but the implication was clear. After Trace departed, riding hard for town, Zara secured the cabin as instructed. Sleep was impossible, so she spent the night sewing by lamplight, her ears straining for any unusual sound in the darkness beyond her walls. Dawn brought no relief from the tension. Zara paced the small cabin, jumping at every creak and rustle. By midday, the waiting had become unbearable. Surely if the gang had attacked town, she would have heard gunfire. Perhaps they had bypassed Promise Creek entirely. Her hopes were shattered by the distant but unmistakable sound of multiple gunshots. Zara rushed to the window, her heart in her throat, but could see nothing beyond the empty expanse between her cabin and Trace's. More shots followed, then silence that stretched agonizingly. Unable to bear the uncertainty any longer, Zara retrieved the shotgun and stepped onto the porch, searching the horizon for any sign of movement. What she saw froze her blood. 3 riders approaching rapidly from the direction of town, too far away to identify but moving with purpose toward the cabins. Friend or foe? Zara retreated inside, positioning herself by the window where she could see without being easily spotted. As the riders drew closer, she recognized with horror that none of them was Trace or anyone else she knew from Promise Creek. These men rode hard and low, their faces obscured by bandanas just like the train robbers. The Rollins gang had found her after all. Panic threatened to overwhelm her, but Zara forced it down, remembering Trace's instructions. She checked the shotgun, making sure it was loaded, and positioned herself where she would have a clear shot at anyone coming through the door. The riders reined in about 50 yards from the cabin, clearly discussing strategy. One pointed toward Trace's cabin, and they split up 2 heading there while one approached her door. When the man was 20 paces away, Zara called out, "Stop right there, I'm armed." The rider paused, then laughed, a chilling sound that carried clearly in the still air. Well, if it ain't the lady from the train. Recognized the description right away when we rode into town, the one that got away." "The sheriff and his men will be right behind you," Zara bluffed, her finger tense on the trigger. "Sheriff's a bit tied up at the moment," the man replied, dismounting but keeping his horse between them. "Town's having itself a little excitement. What do you want?" Zara demanded, though she feared she knew the answer. "Same thing as before, lady, your valuables. Heard tell you're running a fancy hat shop now, must be doing well for yourself." Zara's mind raced. These men had come specifically for her. Someone in town must have mentioned the connection between her and the train robbery. But what could she do? She was outnumbered, and her shooting skills, while improved, were no match for experienced gunmen. "I have money in the shop," she called. "Not here." "Now that's a shame," the robber drawled, edging closer. "Guess we'll just have to take whatever we find, then burn the rest. Make an example, like." The casual threat to destroy everything she and Trace had built ignited a fury in Zara that overshadowed her fear. Without further warning, she fired the shotgun through the window, the blast shattering glass and sending the outlaw diving for cover. "Next one won't miss," she shouted, quickly reloading as she'd been taught. Shouts came from the direction of Trace's cabin, followed by more gunfire. The outlaws were firing back now, bullets thudding into the wooden walls of her home. Zara ducked behind the heavy oak table, using it as a shield while she considered her options. She could stay and fight, but they would eventually break in. She could try to run, but where? The open land between the cabins and the creek offered little cover. The creek. If she could reach the dense willow thickets that lined its banks, she might be able to hide or make her way downstream toward town. Decision made, Zara grabbed her reticule out of habit, stuffing the remaining shotgun shells into her pocket. The cabin's back window was small but big enough for her to squeeze through if she abandoned her skirts. Quickly, she stripped to her petticoat, using a kitchen knife to cut the restrictive garment to knee length. The impropriety of her attire was the least of her concerns now. Another volley of shots hit the cabin and she heard boots on the porch. It was now or never. Zara pushed the window open, fired one last shot toward the front door to buy time, and scrambled out the back. She hit the ground running, keeping the cabin between herself and the outlaws for as long as possible before making a desperate dash for the creek. Shouts behind her confirmed she'd been spotted, and bullets kicked up dirt at her heels. The creek was swollen with recent rain, its current swift and cold when Zara plunged in. The water reached her waist, threatening to sweep her off her feet, but she pushed forward, using overhanging branches to pull herself along. Once in the cover of the willows, she paused to catch her breath, listening for pursuers. The sounds of horses and men crashing through the underbrush were drawing closer. They were tracking her. Zara continued downstream, staying in the water to hide her trail, moving as quietly as possible while fighting the current. Her petticoat, heavy with water, dragged at her legs, and her boots were filled with silt, but fear drove her onward. She had traveled perhaps half a mile when she heard hoofbeats approaching rapidly from the direction of town, multiple riders moving fast, reinforcements for the outlaws. Or rescue, unwilling to reveal herself until she knew. Zara pressed deeper into the willow thicket, the shotgun clutched to her chest. The riders thundered past her position, heading toward the cabins, and through gaps in the foliage, she caught glimpses of Sheriff Cooper, several townsmen, and her heart leapt. Trace, his face set in lines of grim determination. Relief made her knees weak, but Zara knew she wasn't safe yet. The outlaws were still between her and her would-be rescuers. She needed to circle around and approach from another direction. As she started to move, a twig snapped behind her. Zara whirled, raising the shotgun, to find herself face to face with one of the bandits, a man with cold eyes and a scar that traced from his temple to his jaw. "Thought you'd get away, did you?" he snarled, his own gun leveled at her chest. "Drop the shotgun." Zara assessed her options in a heartbeat. At this range, neither could miss. If she fired, they would likely both die. "I said drop it," the outlaw repeated, cocking his revolver. A shot rang out, deafening in the enclosed space of the thicket. Zara flinched, expecting pain, but it was the outlaw who jerked backward, a look of surprise crossing his face before he crumpled to the ground. "Zara," Trace's voice, frantic with worry, called from just beyond the willows. "Zara, are you there?" "Here," she cried, her voice breaking with emotion. "I'm here," Trace burst through the foliage, his expression transforming from fear to profound relief when he saw her standing unharmed. He holstered his smoking gun and crossed to her in 2 strides, enfolding her in an embrace so tight it nearly crushed the breath from her lungs. I thought when I saw the cabin empty and the window, he couldn't complete the thought, burying his face in her wet hair instead. I'm all right, Zara assured him, her own arms locked around his waist. What about the others, the town? They tried to rob the bank, but we were ready for them, Trace explained, finally loosening his hold enough to look at her. 2 dead, 1 wounded. The rest fled, but these 3 split off heading straight for the cabins. Cooper figured out they were after you specifically. They recognized me from the train, Zara confirmed. Someone in town must have mentioned the connection. Trace's expression darkened. Vivian Reed. She was talking about it at the general store yesterday, how you'd escaped the Rollins gang once already. They must have overheard when they were scouting the town. Jealousy seemed petty in light of what had happened, but Zara couldn't help wondering if Vivian's loose tongue had been entirely accidental. Sheriff Cooper and 2 deputies appeared, leading horses. Found the other 2 by the cabins, Cooper reported. 1 dead, 1 trussed up like a Thanksgiving turkey. Your lady's handiwork, I reckon. Trace looked at Zara with a mixture of pride and exasperation. You fought them off alone. I remembered what you taught me, she said simply. Something shifted in Trace's expression, then a final barrier falling away. Marry me, he said abruptly. Zara blinked in confusion. I already said yes, remember? No, I mean now, today, I don't want to wait any longer. His hands framed her face, his eyes intense. Life's too uncertain, too precious to waste a single day we could have together. Despite her bedraggled appearance and the dead outlaw at their feet, Zara felt a bubble of joy rise within her. Yes, she whispered. Today, Sheriff Cooper cleared his throat awkwardly. As touching as this is, maybe we could continue this conversation somewhere less damp, and after the lady has had a chance to change clothes. Only then did Zara become fully aware of her state of undress, standing in a cut-off petticoat, soaked to the skin, with her hair in wild disarray. She should have been mortified, but instead, she began to laugh, a release of tension that soon had Trace joining in, their shared mirth a defiance of the danger they'd survived. I think, Trace said when they'd both caught their breath, that we have a wedding to arrange. True to their word, Zara and Trace were married that very evening in the Promise Creek Church. Clara Jenkins had marshaled the women of the town to transform the simple building with autumn flowers and candles, while Zara wore a hastily altered blue dress that had once belonged to Martha. The ceremony was brief but heartfelt, with Reverend Williams speaking of love's resilience in the face of adversity. When Trace slipped his mother's simple gold band onto Zara's finger, his hands were steady, his voice unwavering as he promised to love and cherish her all the days of his life. I've been waiting for you, he whispered as they shared their first kiss as husband and wife, even when I didn't know it. And I've been finding my way to you, Zara replied, even when I didn't know where I was going. Their wedding celebration became intertwined with the town's relief over the outlaws' defeat. Music and laughter filled the church hall, with even Vivian Reed offering grudging congratulations after a stern talking to from her father about the consequences of gossip. Later, as they rode back to Trace's cabin, now their home under a canopy of stars, Zara leaned against her husband's chest, content in a way she had never imagined possible when she first boarded that train to Wyoming. What are you thinking? Trace asked, his arms secure around her waist as he guided the horse along the familiar trail. That sometimes the worst moments of our lives lead us to the best, she replied honestly. If that train hadn't been robbed, if you hadn't found me. I would have found you anyway, Trace insisted. At the station in town, your aunt made me promise, Zara twisted to look at him. Is that really why you were waiting that day, just because of a promise to Martha? In the moonlight, she could see his smile, tender and a little mischievous. Martha showed me your photograph months ago. Said her niece was coming west and might need a good man to look after her. I took one look at your face and volunteered on the spot. Thomas Irwin, Zara exclaimed in mock outrage. Are you saying you had designs on me before we even met? I'm saying, he replied, brushing a kiss against her temple, that I recognized something in your eyes, even then a spirit that matched my own. And when I found you after the robbery, standing there with your chin up and your hair wild, refusing to show fear even though you were hurt and alone." He shook his head in wonder. "I knew I'd been waiting my whole life for you." The simple truth of his words settled into Zara's heart, fitting there as perfectly as her hand in his. "Then I'm glad I jumped from that train," she said softly, "and I'm glad you were waiting." As their cabin came into view, lanterns lit to welcome them home, smoke curling from the chimney where friends had prepared a fire for the newlyweds, Zara felt a sense of rightness that transcended all the hardships and dangers that had brought her to this moment. Her train had been robbed before arrival, but what seemed like disaster had delivered her precisely where she was meant to be, into the arms of a man who had indeed been waiting, not just that day in the desert, but all his life. And she, without knowing it, had been journeying toward him all along. 5 years later, Zara stood on the porch of their expanded home, watching as Trace taught their 3-year-old son, Samuel, to ride his first pony. Beside her, baby Martha slept peacefully in her cradle, her tiny fist wrapped around a ribbon from her mother's hat shop. The Promise Creek Millinery had grown into one of the most successful businesses in the county, with Zara's designs sought after by women as far away as Denver. Trace's ranch had prospered as well, now boasting over 100 head of cattle and the finest horses this side of Cheyenne. But their greatest wealth lay in the family they had created together, in Samuel's laughter as the pony trotted in a careful circle, in Martha's sweet baby scent, in the love that had only deepened with each passing season. "Mama, look." Samuel called, his face alight with pride as he gripped the saddle horn. "I'm riding just like Papa." "I see you, darling," Zara called back, her heart full. "You're doing wonderfully." Trace glanced up at her, his smile as warm and reassuring as it had been that first day when he found her in the desert. Time had added a few lines around his eyes, a touch of silver at his temples, but to Zara, he was more handsome than ever, his face the map of their shared life, their shared love. Later, after the children were asleep and the house was quiet, they sat together on the porch swing, wrapped in a quilt against the evening chill. "Happy?" Trace asked, his arm around her shoulders. "Completely," Zara replied, resting her head against him. "Though sometimes I still can't believe how it all began with a train robbery and a cowboy who said he'd been waiting for me. Best thing those outlaws ever did, running off with that train and leaving you behind," Trace mused, "though I wouldn't recommend thanking them." Last I heard, the surviving Rollins boys were still serving time in the territorial prison. Zara laughed softly. "I don't think I'll be sending a thank you note, but I am grateful in a strange way for how everything unfolded." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars emerge in the vast Wyoming sky until Trace spoke again, his voice thoughtful. "You know, when Rebecca died, I thought that was it for me. Couldn't imagine loving anyone else, building a life with anyone else." He tightened his arm around her. "Then Martha started talking about her niece coming west, showed me that photograph, and something shifted, like a door opening just a crack. And now," Zara asked, though she knew the answer, "now I can't imagine any life but this one with you." He kissed her temple, her cheek, and finally her lips, still with the same tenderness that made her heart flutter after all this time. "I've stopped waiting, Zara. Now I'm just living, loving every day we have together." "As am I," she whispered against his mouth. "As am I." Above them, a shooting star traced a brilliant path across the heavens, a celestial punctuation mark to their quiet declaration. Neither made a wish. They had everything they needed already, here in this home they had built together, in this love they had found against all odds. The train robbery that had seemed like the end of Zara's dreams had been, instead, just the beginning, the first step on a journey more wonderful than she could have imagined. And Trace, who had been waiting without knowing exactly what he was waiting for, had found in her the answer to a question his heart had been asking all along. Together, they had transformed waiting into finding, chance into destiny, and two separate paths into one shared journey, a love story written across the wild Wyoming sky, as enduring as the land itself.